Hi, WonderCon. Welcome to Star Trek Comics to Deep Space and back again. I think probably some of you have been waiting around to see this panel for a while if you were planning on going to WonderCon, so thanks for waiting, and everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm John Barber. I'm Editor-in-Chief at IDW Publishing, and I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists here. The title of the panel is To Deep Space and Back Again. It's a double meaning. One is, of course, we are doing a Deep Space Nine comic, the first one in a long time. And that is by I'm gonna go in the random order. Everybody's showing up in my Zoom here. Mr. Scott Tipton.
How you doing, everybody?
I'm gonna have to introduce you both together. David Tipton as well. No relation, I believe. Just a coincidence. True thing. Editor on year 5 for a long time. Denton Tipton, actually no relation.
Yeah, I know. He is our unbrother. Yes.
really confusing.
Yes. But the two of you, longtime Star Trek writers. So if you can introduce yourselves, maybe Scott first, and then
Sure.
David.
Scott Tipton here. My brother David and I have been writing Star Trek for a while for IDW. We've done everything from classic to next gen to the really fun stuff like Doctor Who crossovers and Planet of the Apes crossovers. David?
And we often work with the person underneath me there on the screen is J.K. Woodward. And we've worked with him on projects like our Mirror Universe books and our adaptation of Hart and Ellison, Sitting on the Edge of Forever.
And J.K. Woodward, longtime Star Trek artist and painter, and you're doing the variant covers on the comic, which I did not say the name of, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Too Long a Sacrifice. Go ahead.
This was a lot of fun artwork to do because it was described as sort of film noir crime story. So I've always kind of drawn things with that kind of idea in mind, that heavy shadow, singular light source thing. So there's a lot of great covers, and I don't know how much we can show, but I do have some files with me if we can share later.
Cool. And the double part of the meaning for Deep Space and Back Again is the other series we're going to be talking about here is Star Trek Year 5, which is hitting the point very soon once the world is ready for the comics that we've made. With the Enterprise returning back from its 5-year mission. I'm sorry, it's year 5 from her 5-year mission to Earth from the deep space voyage, and we're here with another writing pair, Jackson Lanzing and Collin Kelly, who are the showrunners of this series. Jackson.
Howdy. Yeah, Collin and I are lucky enough to be sort of in a captain seat on this particular part of the voyage. But unlike a lot of other comics, we operate in a writing room. We put it together like a television series, which you mentioned Denton Tipton. I think, that came down from him from the very get-go. And so we've had the enormous luck and privilege of getting to work with 3 other incredible writers on this series, 2 of whom are not here, Jody Hauser and Jim McCann, and one of whom is Brandon Easton.
Well, all right, we'll go. Hey, Brandon Easton.
What I did there, I'm just like doing your job for you, John. Terrible.
Yeah, just skipping over Collin. Like
what a monster. No. I'm sorry.
Back. No, Brandon. I think I've worked with you longer than anybody else on here personally. You do all kinds of stuff. So, who are you?
Oh, hi. I'm Brandon Easton. I'm a TV writer, also much longer career in comic books. I worked on Marvel's Agent Carter, season 2. I've done a lot of stuff with IDW, Transformers Deviations, Mobile Armored Strike Command of the Revolution, working with John Barber and a lot of really awesome folks. Currently doing Marvel Action Spider-Man with IDW, as well as Judge Dredd. And I found out I was the first African-American writer of Judge Dredd in history. So I was pretty stoked about that. That blew my mind. And I've had the incredible pleasure to work with Jackson and Collin on Star Trek Year 5, which has been an extraordinary experience on every conceivable level. So I'm very happy to be here. It's like a Brady Bunch of Star Trek right now. So this is pretty cool.
It really is. Collin, do you want to actually like say who we were? I totally dropped the ball on like introducing us at all.
Collin?
That's okay. Yeah, Collin Kelly. Jackson Lanzing's my writing partner. Yeah, we're coming from comics, film, and TV as well. You might know our stuff from Joyride from Boom Studios, as well as we did Gotham City Garage over at DC. But genuinely, Star Trek has always been our first love, and getting to do this book, especially with amazing talents like Brandon, has been a dream come true. We are so thrilled to be bringing Enterprise back on its back from its 5-year mission to its home port of Earth, of course, with some sizable challenges along the way.
All right. Let's talk about some of those challenges. Not the least of which has been the fact there's 2 of these comics printed that we're again waiting for the world to be ready for. I think we can.
I could just bring them up on my desktop right now, and we could just show them to everybody. Yeah, we just do a live read. I'm here for it.
The next issue, issue 11, is due out June 3rd, so we should be seeing that pretty soon. So very excited to have that coming out. And then the following issue is already printed, and we've got a couple more issues down fully. So looking forward to having these start rolling out. So can you guys walk us through kind of what year 5 is for anybody that's maybe just joining us because it's a Star Trek series, but also where we are in the story?
Yeah, of course. So Star Trek Year 5 is exactly what it sounds like. It's, the 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, yada, yada, yada. We're coming into an end. We're here on year 5 of the 5-year mission. And finally, we're getting to tell effectively the final season of Star Trek, the original series. Now, this has been told in a lot of different ways before. There's a lot of really great, notable works, both from IDW and in the novelization space, that have told the story of the Enterprise coming home. But generally, those are told in sort of individual, chunk stories. This was a chance to tell a whole season and really try to embrace that serialized storytelling nature that TOS had, but then bringing in a nice thread of character arc along the way. So we really lens in on Kirk, who, despite, I think, a lot of the way that the rest of the cast has been mythologized and grown out over the course of it, is the beating, living heart of Star Trek, the original series. And we really try to dig deep into his world, into his conflicts, into his struggles, and look at what it means to be a man who defines himself by a command that he is about to lose, and what it means to step forward into a new world without that command on your shoulders anymore. And it's really exciting because we know that by the motion picture, Kirk's going to be looking back and regretting this decision to step into Admiralty, that he's going to be regretting becoming the man that he becomes at the end of our series. And so Star Trek Year 5 got to have this interesting, just natural undercurrent of tragedy to it that most Star Trek gets to tease with, and you get a little bit here and there, but Star Trek at its best embraces tragedy. I think people always go back to City on the Edge of Forever to speak to the Tiptons, or they go back to In the Pale Moonlight, and you can look at these really incredible moments, Inner Light, that are effectively tragedies at their heart. And we said, okay, well, can we tell a season tragedy that still feels optimistic and still feels like Star Trek? And that is where Star Trek Year 5 really embraces. So the first year is all about, first year of comics, that being up to issue 12, is coming back to the Federation. And then this second half of the series, from 13 to 25, is going to be entirely inside the Federation. And we're going to get a chance to go to Andoria and Tellar and Proxima and Earth, and really see these things through the lens of the original series, which we never got to do. So it's a really exciting chance to see outside of the normal Star Trek box and also embrace a bunch of new storytelling tools.
It also lets us really kind of dive in and explore some of the aspects of Trek that they frankly just couldn't afford in the original series. Most notably, we get to really unpack the Federation's relationship with the Tholians, which have always been just an incredibly fascinating species that really didn't get explored much, really was explored mostly in the Mirror Universe episodes of Enterprise. So being able to really unpack them and show what a massive force, larger, the Assembly is larger than the Federation, and what that means when the Federation itself comes kind of clashing in with them through the adventures of the Enterprise has just been a real dream. And if you want to see how that really comes to a head, then yes, everyone, pick up issues 11 and 12, which, like all the series, are a basically 2-part single episode.
And 11 and 12 is actually is a moment, is going to bring us to a moment. And I think at this point that's clear just from the covers, so I don't think I'm ruining much. Is going to bring us back to a moment that we teased on the very first page of issue 1 of the series. So a lot of people opened up issue 1, saw this first page that shows Kirk crashing the Enterprise into a planet with a gun to his head from a mysterious figure. And the question was, okay, well, how did he get there and what's going on? And then we flash back and we're taking you up to that moment. But that moment isn't the end of the series. That moment is simply the halfway mark. And so we're gonna get to that halfway mark. We're gonna show you how that resolves. And then we've got another 13 issues of uncharted territory as we go back into the most charted space. It's gonna be really fun.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing the cover, Stephen Thompson's cover for issue 12, and just being like, this is one of the best covers I've ever seen. This is, especially one with no people on it, really.
I feel like he reinvents the wheel on every single cover. I'm like, the cover for 11 is just Isis. It's just the cat walking through engineering unseen, but casting the shadow of a woman. And honestly, it's like high art. I was like, I'm like, I look at it to make myself feel better sometimes. It's just like, oh, I love this cover. And he does it every time. The cover for issue 14 came out a couple days ago, and it's got Kirk with a batleth, and there's another, a Klingon reflected in the batleth, and he's bleeding from the eyes, and it's an incredible cover. I was blown away.
Yeah, and on 11 and 12, Stephen Thompson's drawing it along with some help from Kieran McCowan, Sylvia Calafino, and Maria Keene, with Charlie Kirkhoff doing the coloring. Don't want to leave them out. They're not here with us, but certainly here with us in spirit. So, it actually wasn't, gosh, I don't know. Time has lost all meaning. So sometime in the last 100 years, we all gathered together at a secret location for a writer's summit for the second half of year 5. And Brandon, you were there. We got to plan out where your next story was going. Can you tell us a little bit about the summit, and then also what you can about, without spoiling all the stuff in between, what you've been focusing in on the Trek episodes you've been writing?
Well, the real trick is following up what these guys do, because when I was issue 3 and 4, which was returning to the Sigma Iota 2, with the gangster world, which is now a crazy representative democracy gone amok. And it's just, it raises my game when I have to follow people who really know Star Trek more than me. And I thought I was a Star Trek master until I met these guys. I mean, good God almighty. It's incredible. I mean, the summits are what they are. It's like a writer's room of people who you don't have to explain anything to, One thing, we all work in a business, and sometimes you start going into Trek and you get inside baseball with Trek and people look at you like you're insane, but with this, every little tiny thing, words, episode titles, music cues, everybody knows, and everyone's synced in, and that's the beauty of those summits. It just allows you to play in a confined space, but still find a way to make it incredibly exciting and almost new, like the Love Boat, exciting and new, except for the Enterprise. So it's a lot of fun. And, it's in this top secret location that happens to be an archive for Paramount and all the Star Trek stuff. We got to see things that I didn't even know existed, like a Jadzia and Worf's wedding costumes from DS9, like Decker's costume from the motion picture, all these little trinkets, things that are real, that Trek still has, that still exist physically, that you can touch and smell and look at. I mean, very few people in the world get to have that experience, and I'm very glad that we did. So that was the real highlight beyond just working on this.
It's an absolute honor, isn't it? It's just like both times that we've done it now, I've come away like glowing for the next couple of days just from being in the same room with all of that Trek history.
Yeah, and as far as what I'm working on, I don't know how much I can actually reveal, but we're trying to, one of the things that I like is that we're trying to get them to the people that we see them as in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Because obviously the show ended in 68, 69 or whatever, and the motion picture comes out in 79. So there's a space there, and we were trying to figure out the time and dates within canon and continuity. But enough time has passed that whatever happens in this series still has an impact on them at the beginning of that movie and where they are and how they think about the world. So I've had opportunity in my 2 issues to play with Kirk's relationship with Carol Marcus and his acknowledgement of his non-relationship with David, Marcus. And what I'm going to do, what I've pitched and which we've kind of already kind of greenlit, I want to deal with another character, Spock, and certain things about, there's a gap in him too that I kind of want to explore and get into. And I think that's what's going to lead into my final 2 issues, which lead directly into their big finale. So that's about as much as I think I can say about my plans for the series.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And I want to sit here and pitch your entire episode to the audience.
There was that was really an incredible experience, going there. So that was actually my first time there, seeing that. But it was just having you guys pull out star maps, and we're not messing around. The order of the planets we're going in is the order you would fly by, and all of that kind of stuff. And I've been to a number of summits of comic book stuff in my life, and this is probably by far the smoothest and just most positive. And everybody, even when things didn't work, everybody kind of went down the road and figured out together that this isn't going to work, and that was pretty rare and honestly utterly goofball that we knew it was gonna happen anyway. We still wanted to spin those wheels.
I think it's a really cool thing doing the summit with this squad, because a lot of them have either television experience, like almost all of us have some manner of television experience, or we have a lot of collaborative experience. Jody Hauser is both a close friend of Collin and I, who we just see a lot socially because we live right next to each other. We have a lot of the same interests. But we also play in a lot of role-playing games together. Like we play D&D all the time. So Jody's really used to just jumping on an idea, and then when the idea doesn't work out, figuring out a new way towards that idea, which is basically television writing. And then obviously Brandon has a ton of experience in a room. He has more experience in a room than either Collin or I. Jim has a ton of experience in a room. And so everybody came to it, I think, with enough training and enough understanding of how to do this. That really, I think the people who were probably most nervous about it working were Collin and I, and we just really lean on the fact that we're big fans of the creators and we're big fans of the work, and we love, as Brandon pointed out, we just sort of love and breathe Star Trek. So if it feels true and it feels right, then we really just try to let that win the day, and that makes it really fun. I agree, it's an incredibly fun experience. We've been part of a lot of summits, and none are more fun than the Trek ones.
Yeah, just getting out of the way of all these other talented creators was literally the best thing we could possibly do. Helping guide where we could, and then just listening to the amazing ideas coming out of them and being like, yes, excellent. When inside we were actually jumping up and down for joy, because this is exactly the kind of story that we as fans would be so incredibly hungry to watch.
Yeah.
Hey, just to jump in with a story for you guys who've been to the archive. A few years back, I wrote a book called The Star Trek Vault. And so I got to spend a couple of weeks in the last version of the archive. And they just left me alone. And said, whatever you need's in here, go find it. And so there are these big filing cabinets full of all the past issues of Star Trek magazine, but it was all out of order back then. So one day I pull up in this drawer and look inside, and it's just a big section of the control panel from the Enterprise, the classic, just sitting in the drawer. I'm like, oh my God, what are we looking at? You never knew what you were going to find in that place. It was amazing.
Well, and the room that blows my mind is the room that's all the archive, all the behind the scenes photography. Yeah. Right, just binders and binders. Every single episode, a binder of hundreds of behind-the-scenes shots, all on little negative slides, and you're just flipping through, and it's like this is the entire history of the entire show, the entire legacy, kept right here in these beautiful little binders.
I just can't get past somebody saying with a straight face, "Would you like us to unbox the Borg cube?" Yeah. and you're just sort of sitting there being like, "I'm sorry, what?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, it's in a crate in the other room." It's like, I remember seeing that for the first time and like my mind exploding, and here I am, and it's like sitting in the other room, and it's like up to my knee. It's the craziest thing.
One day I walked out with the first contract phaser rifle. And just office. I'm like, hey man, you mind if I borrow this for the night? It was an unbelievable experience.
That's jeez. Yeah, that is amazing. I guess we'll while you're up here, Scott, let's jump over and talk a little bit about Deep Space Nine. We'll definitely come back, bounce around and everything, but this is the first Deep Space Nine comic since, I don't know if my notes are correct, 1975.
Actually, no. The last Deep Space Nine comic was actually by Dave and I for IDW. It was Fool's Gold, and that was, what was that, 99?
I think
98?
it'll be around 2008 or 2009, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I almost said 90. Yeah, it was like our fourth or fifth book.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I forgot. I did know that. I forgot. Sorry. I didn't mean to age you guys that way. I mean, age us that way.
Yeah, but it's been a long time for sure.
Yeah. So what was the, can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project, and then also, just what it is, what it's turned into? This is another one, by the way. Sorry to cut you off. Another one, by the way, where issue 1 is exists,
Yes.
and is waiting for places for it to be.
Right. I mean, David and I have always wanted to get back to Deep Space Nine. It's a big favorite of ours, and we just haven't had an opportunity really. But we're always thinking about ways to bring it back and a pitch we can do with it. And then just this year we decided to think about some different things that hadn't been done with it. And about that time, we got a request from you guys. Any thoughts on it? And we're like, well, yeah, let's think of something we can do that will make it feel different and kind of get people's attention on it while still feeling like classic Deep Space Nine. And the idea of treating it like giving it a real noir feel and doing a murder mystery with it just seemed like a great way to kind of get back into that universe and still give it something new to offer to readers. Dave, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, and one of the ideas was we wanted something that, sorry about the siren in the background. We wanted something that would connect in with not just a murder mystery, but also something that brought in Odo and had something to do with Beta Z, something that brought in something about telepathy and that aspect of it as well. So that was another part of the story, was we wanted a little bit of that kind of a psychological mystery and not just a plain ordinary mystery. And the idea of setting on Deep Space Nine gave us a lot of windows for that too.
Because it's basically, you're dealing with a city in space pretty much. And that aspect of it didn't get as much play as I think it could have on the series. And being able to do that, and we have this whole undercurrent of a population that you don't see much, that there's kind of a dark underbelly to Deep Space Nine. The tricky thing with Deep Space Nine is we can't really do stories past the end of the series because half the cast is gone. So we need to find a spot somewhere in the city's history that's a good place to tell the story. And I think it was David's idea to do it right at the height of the war.
Yeah, and this story is set towards the end of season 6. So there's a lot of things going on with the individual characters in the context of the war. And that allows Garrick and Odo all to play important parts that also fits into the overall arc-oriented storytelling of Deep Space Nine, which is a great way to have that kind of approach, is that it's not just a standalone story, but it also fits into those important story arcs from those last 2 seasons.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, when this book was announced, it was right after Rene Auberjonois passed away, the actor.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And so there was a lot of speculation that this book was designed as a tribute to him, and it really wasn't. In that, I think David was writing Odo's dialogue when we heard the news, but as it turns out, the book was always going to be really keeping him as the focus. So it's becoming a kind of a tribute to a great actor and a great character he played for so many years, and getting the chance to go back and give him this big spotlight moment, I think we're really kind of honored to be doing it.
Yeah, and I feel like there've been a number of times where there've been like weird tragedies have happened right in the middle of some comics I've been working on with related things, but that was definitely one of the ones that really hit for everybody at Trek, and I'm also I'm a massive Deep Space Nine fan. Like that's my it's probably my favorite Trek, as much as I love the original series and Next Gen, and a lot of them, and it definitely hit me.
Yeah, it was really a shock. I was actually writing the book, sitting at home writing, and I was actually specifically writing Odo dialogue. My wife walked in, she said, "Did you hear?" I said, "What?" And I said, "I can't believe it. I'm writing his dialogue right now." So as it's turned out, it's become something of a tribute to him for that very reason. And you know, he was an actor with a long history of playing complicated and interesting characters, and I think that was something that was kind of gave a little extra meaning to this story as it's turned out too.
Yeah, and to bring it back to maybe something a little happier of dark, the art in the series is by Greg Scott, who is somebody I've known for years, and he bleeds noir. I think you just couldn't you couldn't. There's no more so noir. And Felipe Sobrero, who's I think an old collaborator of his, is doing the colors.
It looks good and it's so moody, but he still gets the likenesses, which is great.
Yeah, it's a little unusual, you know, for what we see in a lot of the Trek comics, which is exciting.
We were talking about using Greg on year 5, like right before he ended up on DS9. So I'm going to shake my fist at you guys because he's so good. I mean, it's fine. We ended up with Ana Hernandez. He's incredible. I've got nothing bad. You know, we're happy campers.
And you got Sylvia helping out, and boy, her work is great.
Sylvia was great on Q Conflict.
Sylvia is an absolute MVP for us.
Yeah,
like she came in and from the first issue until Ayal, like she did our whole run in Jim's issues. She did Jodie's issues. She's coming back and helping out in the first year finale. I mean, she has been every time that she's needed to come in and absolutely kill it. She has in a way that
some of my favorite panels from Q Conflict are by Sylvia. They were just great.
Yeah, she's really wonderful. I'm a huge fan.
And speaking of artists, JK, you're doing the variant covers on this, where you're also like adapting your style to something a little unique and doing these like very, well, you can describe it better, very pulp influenced kind of covers, right?
Yeah, in fact, every time I heard film noir, I just interpreted it in print as pulp illustration, which is something I kind of did in City on the Edge of Forever. If you look at it, it lended itself to, I think, the original series much better, but it was much more interesting to see it in Deep Space Nine and have the opportunity to do this in the covers and do some things that I was never allowed to do before, like shadow whole faces and you know, because it's all with Trek, it's all about the likenesses, and the more you hide the face, the less happy they are. But we sort of got licensed to do things with the art on the covers that I'd never been allowed to do before, and also even redesign somewhat redesign the title treatments and things, so it felt more Pulp magazine. I can actually show you some of the original concept sketches that I did if I can get this right.
Do it.
So here's, okay.
Oh, perfect.
Hold on.
Very unique.
Here's a mountain. No. Okay. So here's the first concept we did. I came up with, and this was based on, I believe, was it your note, Scott?
Yeah.
The idea of a silhouette with Cisco standing in the damage of it. And then the other option was perhaps put Odo in there since he's a big player in the story. And ultimately, that's what we went with. And this is one I just did for fun. And I kind of wanted to I was thinking of making it look a lot like the, what's the name of the documentary? The Things We Left Behind?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was doing that, except with the space station exploding.
I would buy that poster in a moment.
Yeah, 100%, man. That's so cool.
So what we went with was the second choice, and I'll show you what, there we are. That's the finished version of issue 1. But where you can still see this is sort of like a pulp illustrative look. We got really noir with the second one. In fact, they pushed me in a direction I wanted to go in for a very long time. So I'll show you what we came up with here. And I believe the choices, the notes I got from Scott and Dave were this, which I really wanted to do, this, hold on. It's taking a minute. This, which is Worf and Odo intimidating some alien. in a dirty alleyway. I was really looking forward to that, and I was told more shadow, which is something I never hear. So I put the light right behind him, and I thought this would have been a beautiful scene. But ultimately, I saw the wisdom when they told me this idea, and this was actually the one that was chosen. Just Odo in the shadows, alone at his desk, looking at his computer, and then you have a group of suspects basically there, and then you can jazz it up with text or whatever in a kind of pulp magazine kind of way. One of these people killed whatever, like they did in the old detective comics, and that's really what I was trying to channel. And here's the final version.
Wow.
That's nice.
Then I did a mock-up. For this one, I did a mock-up because like I said, I wanted to redesign to look more like a pulp magazine. So get ready for this. This is a mock-up. This isn't a final design. This was just something to give the professionals an idea of what would kind of look cool.
That's so cool.
And that
Oh
fun?
my God, how cool is that?
So you don't want to tell Star Trek. You don't want to mess with Star Trek logos normally. But I felt like this would be fun, and Gold Key did it. So,
and if we all know one thing, it's if Gold Key did it, you should really just run right after that.
I'm there.
Gold Key is about as canon as you get, right?
I have been trying to end a Star Trek episode with Spock just burning the planet with phasers and flying away the whole time, and they just won't let me do it, no matter what I try. I keep saying Gold Key did it, but
well. Actually, in this issue, the regular logos were used, but in the third issue, they actually use this idea slightly different. If I can show it, is that cool, John? Third issue cover.
Sure. Go for it.
All right. So this is what, based on my little mock-up, this is what they ended up doing, and
That's so great.
yeah.
oh yeah.
And I was absolutely thrilled to see it. But yeah, this was a fun 4 covers. Just for that reason, just for more shadows, to be honest, because I always like that kind of moody thing, and especially with the characters. I went almost full Sin City on the second cover. I mean,
What's cool too is on that third cover you see the other character that was with Odo is our new character, a Federation security investigator that he's forced to work with. And so, because we hadn't gotten that far in the scripts yet, J.K. got to design the character, and so he asked, "Well, what's he look like?" And so, we're like, "Well, he's Federation security. He's not really technically Starfleet." So, remember that guy in the bar in Star Trek 3 who grabs McCoy when he's trying to get back to Genesis? He's got that flipped collar. I'm like,
gentlemen, your voices are carrying. Yeah,
I'm like, that's the guy we want. So he looks great.
You also described him as Harvey Bullock-like.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome. And we actually those all the covers do have a pulp inspired logo on your covers.
Oh, they do.
Yeah. We'll make sure you see.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it wasn't until the third.
It's kind of based on what you did. Yeah. So that's definitely. Actually, I think it's
perfect.
You might hear it here first. I believe that's going to carry over onto the paperback as well, which the paperback's going to use Ricardo Drummond's cover for #1, but with like that logo treatment went over great. Everybody loved it.
Great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Definitely,
That's awesome.
definitely captures a unique feel to it. And I think that was really one of the goals of the series.
That's been a fun sort of run through on TOS too. On year 5, we've had these variant covers that JJ Lendel's been putting together that are all designed to either look like retro, like recruitment or sort of travel posters, or on the other hand, like, completely retro episode paperback, covers. And so the whole thing, if you're reading it in variants, if you're reading it in standards, you're getting these incredible Stephen Thompson covers, but on the other hand, we have this whole run of it that all has these pulp covers. Even the trade came out with 2 covers. One that's Stevens or I guess one that's not Stevens. It's the Hildebrandt cover, and then the other, which is the JJ cover. But in both cases, like I think it's really awesome to watch Star Trek kind of embrace this pulp aesthetic across the board, just because that is so much of the influence of the series. And I think people tend to be like, oh, well, it's pulp influence. It's like, man, this is early 1960s science fiction. It is pulp. It's just been repackaged and repackaged and repackaged and repackaged. So I think it's really cool to re-embrace that and find the truth in there.
Well, not to mention the Benny story in Deep Space Nine. I don't remember the title. But
Far Beyond the Stars, man.
Yes.
One of the greatest episodes. Okay. All right. So I'll pitch this because there's no way they'll ever let us do this. But Stephen Thompson, the artist on Year 5, became obsessed for a while with sending me, he was putting them on Twitter, but then he would just send them to me. These images that were all like gangster versions of Kirk and Spock. I think it started to come up when we were doing the Iosha one, and they started as covers for Brandon's episode in our first year. And it was like, it's Kirk, with a black eye getting this mugshot taken in like a very like 40s look or whatever. And I remember I hit him up and I was like, oh, well, these are awesome. We should pitch a thing that's like this, but also it's Benny, and also it's Picard and his detective persona, and also eventually we were like, oh, we can just take every.
It was a good goof, right? It was a very funny joke.
It was a funny goof that turned into a very serious pitch that someday we will find a way to make happen.
John, we're looking at you.
I know. I'm just looking at you, John. But Far Beyond the Stars remains one of those great Star Trek episodes because it manages to deal with very real world things and very true emotional sort of and social ideas, and is all through that. I mean, through Avery Brooks's like incredible lens. I mean, I think he directed those episodes. Like those are, Avery jazz like through and through. They're incredible episodes.
It's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Trek is something that's always managed to reinvent itself through the years, and I think it's like definitely doing that in general right now. It's such a exciting time for Star Trek. It's also more so than like almost anywhere I've seen. Everybody that works on the stuff, and I don't just mean the comics, I mean the people that are reapproving the comics, the people that are running the archive, the people that are running TV shows, they are all hardcore Star Trek fans, and I think that's one of the most amazing things about it is a lot of times you'll get somebody that isn't, that comes to whatever they're doing as a job, and that in my experience has not been the case on these things. There's people that all have opinions. If you were to ask anybody that I've come across, what does Star Trek mean? They're going to have an actual thing that comes from the heart. So I wanted to ask everybody, because I think everybody here is like that as well. What's your Star Trek origin story? What got you into Star Trek originally? Let's start with Brandon, because I haven't heard from you for a minute.
Well, I used to watch Star Trek with my grandfather on UHF TV. It was black and white. Sometimes color would flicker, and so I had no idea what color anybody's uniforms actually were for a very, very long time. But beyond that, me and my grandfather, I spent a lot of time with him. He was a World War II veteran, talked a lot about his experiences overseas during the war. But, Star Trek for his generation was an escape. And for me, it was just something I would, just like being around my grandfather with. And then I watched all the movies in the theaters, all of them, and I didn't quite understand how TOS connected to the movies at all. Because as a kid, I was just like, I don't understand this, but I just like the fact that I got to see things happening in space with really cool characters and really cool moments. I think that I actually literally fell in love with Star Trek during the course of the Next Generation, because I was it started when I was in middle school and ended when I was in college. So I literally grew up with Star Trek The Next Generation, and I was there for every moment. And back in the syndication days, you could watch that same episode 4 or 5 times in a day. So I would see even the worst episodes like 15 times over, in a year. So I was there for the entire run. I was sitting there at the edge of my seat at the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 1, freaking out with my friends. We had to wait all goddamn summer until we got Best of Both Worlds Part 2. The redemption stuff, or reunification, with Spock and the Romulans was like a big highlight of mine. And then, Deep Space Nine I fell in love with because it treated me like an adult. There was so much of Star Trek that I felt, like lacking sex even, or sexuality, whereas DS9 leaned into that hard. I mean, I didn't, like when Cisco went to like the mirror universe and slept with everybody he wanted to sleep with for real, it was like crazy to me, and like, it was just crazy, and I found something in every Trek series that I could like identify with. I mean, even, you know, Enterprise, which had some really cool stuff in it, especially when they got to that final season when you really started to connect it to the original series. So, you know, Trek for me has just been kind of a cultural benchmark. It's just been there, if that makes any sense. It's like I've always turned around and Star Trek has been there over my shoulder, like now, right? You know, it's like literally like that. And I can't think of just one moment. It was hundreds of them, you know, and even writing the Star Trek Waypoint story with Q and V'ger, you know, that was like me falling in love with Trek all over again, because it was something I always wanted to do. And yeah, so that's me, you know.
Collin?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, right? It's always on TV. It's something that's just kind of omnipresent. And I love that Best of Both Worlds is probably, every one of us is probably going to bring that up, but I was watching it on syndication, so you have no idea when that second episode is going to come dropping. But yeah, watching, for me, it was Star Trek Voyager, watching with my dad. I grew up in Hawaii, so the frustrating thing was you wait all week for your Star Trek Voyager, and then it gets preempted for Rainbow Wahine Volleyball, which is very upsetting when you're a kid who just wants his weekly fix of excellent Star Trek geekery. But I think the more important thing was, especially when it comes to Next Gen and the kind of later shows, it's about competence. Right. It's about being able to watch a strong role model, a leader, especially for those of us who maybe grew up in households that didn't really have that same kind of North Star, and having the ability to watch a group of people, family by heart instead of by blood, come together and calmly, rationally, and with empathy solving a problem, which is so rare. I mean, even in our real world nowadays, being able to escape into that kind of fantasy was, I mean, it soothes the soul, and it really helps, I think, makes people become better than they might otherwise have been.
Yeah, there's something I don't remember. I think I read this online or something. It was something that I was thinking a lot about when I came back to IDW a couple of years ago. Was just about Trek, but just thinking about this in general. In Next Gen, especially, or kind of all Trek, but like Next Gen, you really had it where when there's a problem and you go to somebody, a character goes to somebody with the problem, they believe them, and they work to solve it. And that's like there's something about that that's really, like you said, it's something that's.
And it's one of the great things about Picard in particular, and you really see it in the new Picard show. He listens, right? He asks questions, he listens, he synthesizes, and then he executes. And just the ability to actively listen to the people that you're asking questions of, rather than just, essentially waiting for them to parrot back what you want to hear, is something most adults can't even pull off. And yet Picard can do it and save the day, and do it with style. So,
well, and I think what's amazing is that it's not just Picard. It's every single one of these captains has this preternatural ability and is sort of constantly demonstrating what it means to actively listen and what it means to lead without taking credit. That over and over and over again, the idea behind it is not like the person in the captain's chair gets the glory, even though you have characters who are clearly interested in glory, like Kirk, who definitely has an interest in that. He knows enough to know that his interest in glory is his downfall, and he works against it constantly to find a way to work with his team. I think the misnomer of Kirk constantly, and this I think gets to probably a lot of people's Star Trek origin stories in the current generation, is that they were introduced to Kirk via the J.J. Abrams films, which I love, and I mean, especially 09 is like a big touch point for me. But that Kirk, the big twist in those movies is that Kirk is not Kirk. That Kirk is a Kirk who grew up differently, who has a totally different mindset, who has a different upbringing, he has different interests, he's read differently, he's loved differently, his world has been different. And so he is a different man. But the initial James T. Kirk, the sort of like prime universe Kirk, he isn't the sort of like swinging 60s bachelor renegade that he's constantly sort of reframed as in modern culture. He's a guy who admires, I mean, they always used to use Horatio Hornblower as the touch point, right? But I mean, he is a person who admires people like that. He is a person who admires the old sea captain. He's got some master and commander in him. He is not He's not like a Han Solo type. And I think generally we confuse that now just because the later captains, especially Picard, are very staid and very intellectual. But Kirk is all those things. He's just those things through kind of a 60s lens.
And to speak to what you guys were saying about how with Picard, you see somebody who listens, and the Next Gen crew is a crew that's striving to work together and do better. What Next Gen does, which is, I think is so important, is that when they show us somebody who's not like that in Barclay, they don't reject him. They don't dismiss him. They try and make him better. And over the course of that series, you see him get better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to keep going around just in the random order Zoom has put everybody. So David, what was your Trek origin?
I started watching the show like my brother did with my dad in the 70s. And, we were both big fans. And there was nothing else like it on television at the time. And I was a big fan of the movies also, especially the first couple of movies. But I really liked the return of Star Trek with Next Generation. That's because what I thought was sort of missing in the movies was the kind of episode-oriented short storytelling that I really like in Next Generation. And it's sort of that Harlan Ellison type science fiction short storytelling that you don't necessarily tell in a movie, but you tell in episodic television that I thought was really missing. And that's why I like the return of Star Trek to television now as well. Those kind of short stories that have a certain punch, have a certain story to them that is, not necessarily a big theatrical movie, but something more character-oriented and more interesting in that way. And so when Next Generation came back, I was really excited about it because I thought, the other thing to remember is that when Next Generation came on, there was almost no science fiction at all on television. There was a long period of time when you couldn't watch science fiction at all on TV. So when Next Gen came back, it actually opened the door to a lot of other television like that way as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it also just changed the model of how people were putting out TV shows. And
It did.
In a business way too, but that opened the door to exactly that.
I always go back to their open door policy for scripts. I think it's just the most insane thing that a show that big opened its doors to anyone who could send a script in. And as long as they liked your script could get produced. You wouldn't necessarily get the writing credit because they might rewrite you to all hell by, two other better writers than you. Ron Moore might take your script and rewrite it. But Ron Moore only got on that show because he submitted a script that Roddenberry hated and Piller fought for, right? Like the way that people like Jaina Spenson, the way that these people came into Star Trek was through this open door policy that no television show would have these days because it would be madness to do so.
They had the confidence to do that, and it got them some great stories and some great writers who went on to work with them for years.
Changed television.
Yeah. But, Scott, what's your origin? How's it do?
Like with Dave, our dad drove a truck for a living. And if he would get home in time, just barely, he'd get home in time for Star Trek at 6 p.m. on KTVU. And every night, Dave and I would watch Star Trek with our dad, and we'd see how fast we could tell what episode it was by the cold open. And Star Trek was just a huge kind of formative thing. I had the Mego Star Trek toys and the Gold Key comics, and even more than like Marvel and DC stuff, Star Trek was kind of like that was the mythology I was into. And then when that 1-2 punch of Star Trek 1 and 2 hit, Star Trek 1, it's finally getting, I think, the credit it deserves, was just this massive epic event. And then Trek 2, which is just the best, not just the best Trek movie ever, but one of the best action movies ever.
Yeah.
And then to follow up what Dave said, you follow that up with Next Generation, and suddenly we're getting new Trek every week. And we're getting to know these characters from the ground up in a way I never could with classic Trek. And so, it's been just a part of my life forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to admit, everybody talks about how much time they have during quarantine. I've got a 14-month-old and an 8-year-old. I do not have time. My life is the most stressed and most constantly busy I've been my entire life. And I usually pass out 15 minutes after I'm done with things at night. Except I watched Star Trek 2 last week for the 1 millionth time because I just felt like watching Star Trek 2 again.
I just discovered that my wife has never seen First Contact, and we're gonna go through. I'm gonna have to go through like all the movies just to get her to First Contact. I'm really excited. When we started to go back through year 5, she hadn't really watched any Star Trek. She's a big nerd for the things that she's a nerd for, but Star Trek it wasn't part of her upbringing where it was for me. And when we started on year 5, I went back and rewatched, all 3 seasons of TOS. And she watched a lot of it with me, which is the first time we've ever shared Star Trek together. And she loved it. She found all this new stuff that she really loved. She's particularly fond of the beat where Uhura, pretending to be Mirror Uhura, pulls a knife on Sulu on the bridge. She's like, still to this day, she's just like, Nichelle Nichols is such a badass. That moment is so great.
that knife wave.
Dude, it's so great. It's like such a good moment. But so I sort of, after that, I was like, oh, now she's seen Star Trek. I never bothered her about it before. Why would I bother about it now? And we were sitting down about something or another the other day. I think Jerry Goldsmith was scoring something we were watching. And I was like, oh, I love Jerry Goldsmith. His score for First Contact is so good. And she was like, oh, I don't know that. I was like, I think we're watching First Contact now, but first I have to like show you all the Borg episodes. So it'll take a while.
It's funny. I actually had the same experience recently where I was introducing somebody to First Contact. And I couldn't let her watch it without showing Best of Both Worlds, both parts first.
Yeah, exactly.
It has so much more impact, Not that you wouldn't get the story from the movie, but...
No, I mean, Patrick Stewart sells the hell out of every scene there, so you don't need to know why he's mad. He's mad. But, like, if you can see those episodes, I mean, Best of Both Worlds is my Star Trek origin. It was the first episode of Star Trek I ever saw. And it blew my little mind. I had no idea what I was watching. It was... formative in every way. I was drawing Star Trek in my notebook margins by the next day. Like I was obsessed, and I never stopped. But I feel like if you're gonna jump into that movie, you should do yourself the favor of watching Best of Both Worlds because it's all-time television. It's incredible work. Yeah. And you can watch it out of context. You don't need to have seen any other Star Trek. It's really all you need to know is like the conflict of what it means to be a captain thinking about retirement and being a first officer thinking about taking that captain's spot and what drama there is there. The fact that it's Picard and Riker and the Enterprise and all the Star Trek and what they've seen with the Borg before, that doesn't really matter. Like you'll get on top of that. What matters is the human drama, and the human drama on that show is so strong.
It's funny. I was I don't mean to get in my own origin, but like I was a massive Star Trek fan prior to Next Generation come out. Like I was going to Star Trek conventions, and when Next Gen was announced, I was like 100% into it. I watched Star Trek for the first couple of years, or Next Gen for the first couple of years. I think I might be exactly the same age as Brandon. And for some reason, I stopped watching it cold when I started high school. Just like I smashed this glass right now. No, I'm kidding. But I stopped watching it, and I kept watching the movies. So I saw First Contact, I saw, kept up with it through there. Deep Space Nine got me back into it. I didn't watch Best of Both Worlds until about 6 years ago. When my daughter was born, I started rewatching all of Star Trek. And I watched that on a period, I got sick. I was like feverish and like having these, those hallucinating dreams where you keep going back to the same dream when you wake up. I was having that between those 2 episodes. So I watched an episode, tried to go to sleep, and just was hallucinating that I was in the middle of this Borg war. And it was honestly one of the most incredible experiences, fiction watching experiences of my life. I know it's a great episode, and it's like, man, that I lived it.
You watch it now, and you're like, in the middle here, something's missing. It doesn't feel right. Where's that scene?
Yeah. Where's the scene of me?
Yeah, where am I?
JK, what's your origin now?
Well, you combine a little bit of every story here, and that's mine. But I grew up in the 70s, so I started watching the original series in syndication. I was heavily into it because it was a weird sci-fi show. And it wasn't a sci-fi show to me. It was, depending on the episode, it was a mystery. It was a horror show. It was a character drama. It was a comedy. Just depending on what episode you watched, and that kind of impressed me, and that's probably what kept me coming back more than anything. That and Spock Sears. I was 7, so and like everybody else, the movies, of course. I remember 79. Was it 79 or 80?
79.
79. Okay, so I was like about 9 or 10 years old, and I was so excited that Star Trek was getting the Star Wars budget, the Star Wars treatment with special effects. It was it just blew my mind. So I followed the movies right up until well, always. And TNG came out when I was in high school, and I remember hearing about it for the first time because I was actually at a keg party. It was in somebody's house. The TV was on, but the stereo was playing. And, suddenly I see a Klingon in a Starfleet uniform. I'm like, turn the music down! Turn the music down! Everybody shut up!
He's betrayed his people!
So I wasn't cool anymore after that. But I mean, it was kind of just an exciting image to see that how, it's called Star Trek The Next Generation. There was talk of just a continuity. There was in the Organian show, the Organian Treaty show, was it Day of the Dove, or which one was it? I'm so bad at names. Which one?
Isn't that Errand of Mercy?
It's Errand of Mercy.
Errand of Mercy. Errand of Mercy. Yeah, there was talk about maybe one day they'll be allies, and how far-fetched that was. And then here we have a Klingon in a Starfleet uniform, so that just kind of blew my mind. And that kind of continuity kind of enforces the reality of the show. It makes it a much more immersive experience. And also, I was proud of the Federation for doing that.
I think that speaks to the competence of it all, right? Like it's
Yeah.
projecting this dream of even your greatest enemies you can find common ground with, which is there's no greater hope for our species.
Which is a huge part of, you spoke a bit to the Tholians of year 5, but just to bring it back to the work for a second, one of the big swings we took in year 5, and I was a little concerned, frankly, that, we're getting a chance to go back to Kirk and Spock and Bones and Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov and Scotty, and why would you spend time on anybody else, right? But we really felt like there was an awesome opportunity to kind of give ourselves a Worf, as it were. Give ourselves a character who could have a different perspective, or Akira in the DS9 reference. Give ourselves a character who had a really different reference point and who could come to Starfleet from a different background and really start to understand what the Federation meant holistically and organically through the story. So if you weren't a Star Trek fan, maybe you could see yourself in this character as they are learning what we love about Star Trek. And so we introduced in the first episode, and in the first issue, in fact, a Tholian child who Uhura by episode 6 is calling Bright Eyes. And Bright Eyes becomes a reference point for our whole series, where sometimes they are in the center of the story, sometimes they are deep in the background, right? Sometimes they're really big part of it, sometimes they're the lead, sometimes they're not. But they're always learning, they're always being improved, they're always going one step further towards being a member of the crew. And now we're halfway through the series, and in episode 11, we debut their containment suits. So now they can walk around the Enterprise, interact with people, they can talk, but it took us 12 episodes to get there, 12 issues to get there. We really took it slow and tried to understand that even the strangest alien, even the most out there person can become a member of a Starfleet crew and can be appreciated for who they are. That's one of the great dreams of Starfleet, infinite diversity in infinite combinations. And I love it when Star Trek puts its money where its mouth is, basically, and make sure that stuff is represented. I love that there is a chairman there's a crewman in a wheelchair in Discovery. That they never make a point out of it. He's just there. He is competent. He's good at his job, and he has a wheelchair. And Star Trek it's taken them 50 years to get there, but now we have it, and we sort of have to assume, all right, well, Discovery is accessible to folks in wheelchairs. That's incredible. That's awesome. That's a big step for Star Trek, for inclusivity and letting people know that they belong.
Awesome. Well, we're actually coming up on running out of time, and it's maybe a good note to kind of start to go out on. Let me snake back reverse order and let everybody know where they can find you on social media or whatnot, or what else you're working on. So Jackson, we'll start with you and go back around.
Yeah, right on. So you can find me at Jackson Lanzing on Twitter. My last name is spelled with a Z, not an S, which most publishers still can't get right. But yeah, you can find me at Jackson Lanzing. If you're looking out for other stuff that we're doing, the big ones this year, other than Star Trek, which is, our just complete passion.
Our flagship.
It's the flagship. We are doing a book through Vault Comics called Dark One. It's a 215-page original fantasy graphic novel. It's not coming out in single issues. It's only coming out as a hardcover. It's going to be a blast. Cannot wait to share it with people. We're just putting the final touches on that, and we put that one together with Brandon Sanderson, who's one of our heroes. So it's been a real pleasure getting in there and telling a new original science fiction story with somebody as amazing as him. And then we have a new book that hasn't been announced yet and probably won't at this stage for probably a few more months. So working on secrets.
Cool. JK?
Well, I don't know if we announced it yet, so I won't say what it is, but I just finished a cover for you guys for Star Trek. And I'm currently working on something else I can't talk about. But you can find me at JK_Woodward on both Twitter and Instagram. I often, when I do reveal things, I reveal things there, and I often do the time-lapse photography of work because people seem to enjoy that. So find me there, check it out.
Cool. And Scott?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Scott_Tipton. And you can find my weekly column on comic book history, Comics 101, every Wednesday for the last 15 years at the website of my late lamented comic shop, blastoffcomics.com. I'm still doing Comics 101 over there. David and I are finishing up the DS9 series. And I just want to stress to everybody, go support your local shops, man. Your local shops are what's keeping us all working. Your local shops want to help you. So important you do that.
Awesome. David?
You can find me on Twitter at David_Tipton. And just echo what Scott said, just remember that this is going to come to an end. It may take a while, but when it does come to an end, we need to get out there and support those stores. Yep.
All right. And Collin?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at CP Kelly. The P stands for Picard. It doesn't, but, and yeah, I'm working on the same stuff Jack is. We can't talk about one thing, but primarily right now, I'm just trying to get my dog and my cats to get along. Dang, guys.
So if you have any tips, send them to at CP Kelly.
Please help me out. I need it.
Some real end of the world stuff. Brandon?
I'm on Twitter at Brandon Easton. On Instagram at Brandon Easton Writer, I think that is. Let's see. The biggest thing I have is Transformers War for Cybertron Siege, which will be on Netflix. I wrote a few episodes of that series, and I think it's dropping in June. I hope they do it a little earlier because this would be a perfect time to drop it. But yeah, that's like a dream come true series. Also, hopefully, getting back to Transformers Galaxies, the Ultra Magnus arc, which I'm very much looking forward to finishing. That was awesome. And of course, Judge Dredd, False Witness, issues 2 through 4 will be coming out eventually, and Marvel Action Spider-Man, as well as Star Trek Year 5. So yeah, and I have an original series that I kickstarted earlier this year called Dominion's Light. I pitch it as Blade Runner meets Lord of the Rings. It's a fantasy sci-fi mashup. And that'll be coming out sometime in hopefully June or July of this year. So yeah, pretty cool stuff.
The art on that one's by one of my best friends and greatest collaborators, Andrew Griffith. So
yeah, he's doing the art. Andrew Griffith is doing the art, and I can't wait to show that.
Yeah,
more.
Yeah. I think my daughter's getting drawn in there, right?
That is true. Yeah, your daughter's going to be somewhere between pages 11 and 20.
Anyway, I do want to also say thanks to our Star Trek editor, Chase Maratz, who wasn't able to be here today, but he's definitely helped guide all of us through all this stuff, and deserves a lot of credit. I know he's doing well. I talked to him the other day. Just got it. So anyway, thank all of you guys for coming. This has been fantastic. Getting a good time here. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks for joining us on this virtual WonderCon. And hope to see you again here soon. We should have Year 5, number 11, out June 3rd. 12 coming out shortly behind that, and then Deep Space Nine, Too Long a Sacrifice should be out somewhere in that vicinity.
I think I saw May 20th.
What's that?
I think I saw May 20th. The first batch of new books. I think it's in. I thought I read that today. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think you might be, yeah. Because we can get into that, but it exists. It'll be there.
It was out there.
All right. Again, thank you all very much. Thanks for joining us, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bye.